Years ago, I awoke one morning with a simple intention: to have my hair cut before an upcoming trip to London. But just as I prepared to act on this plan, a letter arrived, informing me that the trip was no longer necessary. Naturally, I resolved to postpone the haircut as well, now that it no longer seemed urgent. Yet, something curious happened. A gentle but persistent thought tugged at my mind, like an unspoken command. Get it cut. All the same, go and get it cut. It seemed such a trivial matter to fuss over, so I brushed it aside. But the thought wouldn't leave me. It grew louder, more insistent, until the internal nagging became unbearable. Finally, I yielded and set off for the barber's shop. The barber, as it turned out, was a fellow Christian, a man to whom my brother and I had occasionally offered comfort during his struggles. That day, as soon as I walked through the door, his face lit up with a mixture of relief and awe. "I was praying you might come today," he said. Had I delayed even a day or two, my visit would have been of no help to him. The realization struck me with a deep sense of reverence. Even now, the memory fills me with wonder. Was it mere coincidence? Telepathy? Perhaps simple chance? I cannot say with certainty, but to dismiss it as nothing more would feel like underestimating the extraordinary ways in which God weaves the ordinary into the miraculous. I have seen much greater trials than a barber's troubles, witnessed suffering far beyond the scope of minor inconveniences. I recall a woman whose body was ravaged by disease, her bones consumed by cancer. Doctors, with their measured precision, predicted only months. Nurses, familiar with the rhythms of life and death, whispered that she had mere weeks. She lay there, frail and broken, requiring 3 people just to shift her in bed. Then a humble man, simple in spirit, placed his hands upon her and prayed. It was a prayer of quiet faith, not a cry for spectacle. 1 year later, that same woman was alive, not merely surviving, but walking uphill, navigating even rugged woodland paths with ease. When the final X-ray was taken, her doctor stared at the images in disbelief. "These bones are as solid as rock," he declared, shaking his head. "It's miraculous." What do we make of moments like these? Prayer, I believe, is more than a plea for divine intervention. It is an act of surrender, a declaration of trust in God's wisdom and timing. We are not asked to prove the connection between our prayers and God's answers. We are only invited to believe that, in the unseen fabric of our lives, every thread, no matter how small, matters. As it is written in James 5:16, "The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective." Even when the design remains hidden, God is at work. Whether through an inexplicable nudge to visit a barber or a miraculous restoration of health, prayer has the power to touch places beyond our understanding. To trust in prayer is to trust in the one who hears us, even when all seems lost. And yet, once again, we are left without the comfort of rigorous proof. Medicine, as every honest doctor will admit, is not an exact science. Predictions can falter, and the natural course of events may surprise us. We need not leap to invoke the supernatural to account for the failure of their prophecies. Skeptics will claim that the recovery could have happened in the absence of prayer, and perhaps they are right. But what remains at the heart of this mystery is not the need for empirical proof, but a question far deeper. What kind of evidence could ever satisfy our demand for certainty in matters of prayer? The thing we pray for may indeed come to pass, but how could one ever know that it was not destined to happen anyway? Even if the event were beyond dispute, a recovery so miraculous that all reason faltered, it would still not conclusively prove that it was brought about by your prayers. And herein lies the crux of the issue. The kind of proof we seek, the empirical certainty that we have in the sciences, can never be applied to the realm of prayer. We are often mistaken in how we approach prayer. Prayer is not a mechanism to bring about a specific result, as though by uttering words we control the hand of God. Your Father knows what you need before you ask Him, Matthew 6:8, yet we are still commanded to ask. This seems at first glance paradoxical. Why ask if he already knows? Why pray if the future is already shaped by his will? The answer lies not in the event itself, but in our relationship to it. Prayer is not merely a request for intervention. It is an act of faith, of communion with God. It draws us into the deeper mystery of life, where results are secondary to the act of placing our trust in Him. It is in this trust that the true efficacy of prayer is revealed, not in the certainty of outcome, but in the surrender of our hearts. If everything we prayed for happened as we wished, it would not prove the efficacy of prayer. For prayer, in its essence, is not a command to God, but a request made by finite beings to an infinite and all-knowing Creator. The power of prayer, then, is not that it changes God's will, but that it changes us. We may ask, as children ask their Father, but ultimately, it is in the asking, in the relationship, that the beauty of prayer is found. The essence of a request, as distinct from compulsion, lies in its uncertainty. It may be granted or denied. And when an infinitely wise being listens to the requests of finite and often misguided creatures, it stands to reason that sometimes He will grant their wishes, and sometimes He will not. Were success in prayer guaranteed, it would not confirm the Christian doctrine at all, but something far more akin to magic, a belief in the power of humans to control or bend the natural world to their will. There are, of course, passages in the New Testament that at first glance might seem to promise unfailing success in prayer. Yet, this cannot be their true meaning, for the very heart of the gospel reveals a striking exception. In Gethsemane, the holiest of all petitioners knelt in earnest prayer, pleading 3 times for a particular cup to pass from him, Matthew 26:39. And yet, it did not. If even Christ's request was not granted, how then can we expect that prayer serves as a sort of infallible tool to manipulate the universe according to our desires? That notion must be firmly dismissed. Prayer, then, is not an experiment to be conducted on God. Some may suggest, in their desire for empirical certainty, that a large group of people should pray fervently for all the patients in one hospital, but not for those in another. After 6 weeks, they say, we could tally the results and measure which hospital had more cures and fewer deaths. They propose repeating the test in various locations to eliminate external influences. But even if such an experiment were allowed, which it is not, for we are forbidden to test the Lord, Deuteronomy 6:16, the very nature of prayer would make the endeavor impossible. The flaw lies not merely in the moral presumption, but in the nature of prayer itself. Prayer is not merely words spoken, it is a request made from the heart. Words without thoughts never to heaven go, says the king in Hamlet. To simply utter prayers is not the same as to pray. Otherwise one could enlist parrots, well trained in repetition, to serve in the experiment as effectively as any human. But true prayer requires something deeper, a genuine concern, a heartfelt plea for the relief of suffering or the granting of some good. To pray for the recovery of all the patients in one hospital while ignoring the rest is not an act of compassion. It is a mere calculation, driven by curiosity rather than love. The motive and the method are at odds, and as such, no real prayer can occur under these conditions. Thus, the experiment demands an impossibility. Empirical proof of prayer, or its disproof, remains forever out of reach. Yet, this conclusion should not dishearten us, for prayer is, at its core, a request, one made not just of God, but of each other. We ask things of our fellow creatures just as we ask of God, and not every request is granted. The difference is that, when we pray to the one who knows all, we trust not only in His power, but in His wisdom. We trust that His refusal, as much as His granting, is an act of love. Consider, then, that prayer is not a transaction, nor a method to ensure the outcome we desire. It is rather an invitation to align our hearts with God's will, to trust that His response, whether it is yes, no, or wait, serves a purpose higher than our understanding. As Christ Himself reminds us, your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. Matthew 6:8. Prayer is not an experiment in causality, but an exercise in faith, in learning to trust that God's wisdom surpasses our finite comprehension. We ask for many things in life. We ask for a song to be sung, a raise in pay, or a favor from a friend to feed the cat while we're away. We ask a woman for her hand in marriage. Sometimes we get what we ask for, and sometimes we do not. But when we do, it is far less straightforward than we might think to prove, with any scientific certainty, a causal connection between the asking and the receiving. Your neighbor, for instance, may well be a kind-hearted person who would never let your cat starve, even if you had forgotten to ask. Your employer might be inclined to grant a raise, not because of your request, but because he already knows you could secure better pay from a rival firm and is simply acting to keep you. As for the lady who consents to marry you, are you entirely sure she hadn't already made up her mind before you asked? That cherished yes may not have been the cause of her decision at all, but merely the confirmation of it. Perhaps she orchestrated the entire conversation with the intent of leading to that moment. So it is, in some degree, with the same uncertainty about the efficacy of our prayers to God. What we receive may have been coming to us all along, whether we prayed for it or not. Yet, this is only part of the truth. Our friends, our employers, and our future spouses often tell us that they acted because of our request, and we may know them well enough to trust both their honesty and their understanding of their own motives. When we hear them say, "I did this because you asked," we are reassured, but this reassurance does not come from the methods of science. We do not, and indeed cannot, conduct a control experiment by refusing the raise or breaking off the engagement, only to ask again under different conditions. Life does not offer such luxuries. What we gain instead is an assurance grounded in trust, built from knowing the hearts and minds of those who love us. And so it is with prayer. We do not pray to manipulate outcomes, but to commune with the one who knows our needs even before we ask. We trust that what comes is not mere coincidence or predetermination, but an answer given with love and wisdom. Just as we do not demand scientific certainty from our relationships with people, neither should we expect it in our relationship with God. The value of the request lies not in the result, but in the act of asking itself, in the acknowledgement of our dependence, our trust, and our willingness to accept what comes, whether it be yes or no. As Christ said, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you." Matthew 7:7. But this promise is not one of certainty in results. Rather, it is an invitation to trust in the goodness of the one who answers. Our assurance when it comes to prayer is of an entirely different kind than scientific knowledge. It arises not from compiling data or making calculated observations, but from personal experience, knowing the other party, not merely knowing about them. If we are ever to reach the assurance that God hears and sometimes grants our prayers, it will be through this kind of knowledge. It will not come from tallying up successes and failures, nor from trying to calculate whether our answered prayers exceed what might be expected by chance. No, those who know a man best also know whether, when he granted their request, he did so because they asked. Likewise, those who know God best will know whether he answered because of prayer, whether he sent me to the barber's shop because the barber prayed. For too long, we have approached this question of prayer from the wrong angle and on the wrong level. To even ask, "Does prayer work?" sets us on the wrong footing. The very word "work" suggests we are dealing with a mechanism or a machine, something that functions automatically in response to inputs. But prayer is not magic, nor is it a tool to manipulate reality. Prayer is either a profound illusion, or it is an intimate personal connection between incomplete, developing souls like ourselves and the one infinitely complete person, God Himself. Petition, asking for things, is only a small part of prayer. It is the outermost edge of what is far greater. Confession and penitence are the gateway. Adoration is the sanctuary. The presence, vision, and enjoyment of God, that is the true bread and wine of prayer. In the act of prayer, God reveals Himself to us. That He sometimes answers our petitions is a secondary matter, almost a byproduct, though an important one. From the revelation of God's nature, we learn what He does. But petitionary prayer, while secondary, is both permitted and, in fact, commanded. Give us this day our daily bread, Matthew 6:11. These words are not mere formality. They are a direct command from Christ Himself. Yet they raise a perplexing question. Can we believe that God ever truly alters His action in response to our suggestions? For surely, infinite wisdom needs no guidance, and infinite goodness needs no urging to do what is best. But consider this. God does not need any of the finite agents He has created. He does not need farmers, bakers, or butchers to provide us with food, nor teachers to impart knowledge, nor missionaries to spread His word. He could, if He chose, miraculously sustain our bodies without food, or provide us knowledge without the need for scholars, or convert the nations without human evangelists. Yet He chooses not to. Instead, He allows the soil, the weather, the animals, and the minds and wills of men to cooperate in the execution of His divine will. This is no accident. In His infinite wisdom, God has given us the dignity of causality. He has allowed us, His creatures, to participate in His work. And this is not limited to the realm of physical action. Prayer, too, is part of this participation. He has instituted it so that our petitions, in some mysterious way, contribute to the unfolding of His will. Thus, prayer is not simply a way of requesting things from God. It is a way for us to share in the divine process. He invites us into His work, not because He needs us, but because it elevates us. As Pascal wisely observed, God instituted prayer in order to lend to His creatures the dignity of causality. And this dignity extends far beyond mere prayer, touching every facet of our lives where we cooperate with God's unfolding plan. Whenever we act at all, whether through prayer or any other means, God lends us the dignity of participation. It is no stranger, nor any less strange, that our prayers should affect the course of events than that any of our actions should do so. Our prayers, like our actions, have not advised or altered God's mind. His eternal purpose remains, but that purpose unfolds differently depending on the actions, including the prayers, of His creatures. God, in His mysterious way, seems to do nothing Himself that He could delegate to us. He commands us to accomplish slowly and imperfectly what He could complete in an instant. He allows us to fail or neglect tasks He would have us fulfill. Perhaps we fail to grasp the enormity of this challenge, this divine balance of allowing finite free wills to coexist with His omnipotence. It appears to involve, at every moment, what seems like a kind of divine abdication. We are, at our core, nothing, merely recipients or spectators of His grace. Yet we are also privileged, given a place in the great work of creation, allowed to wield our small, fragile tools. This mysterious process, creation happening before our eyes, is no light matter. God is making something out of nothing, indeed, making gods out of nothing. Or so it seems to me. But even this thought, at its best, is only a mental model, a symbol. Everything we say on such subjects must be analogical, parabolic. The full reality is beyond our grasp, but we must at least strive to remove bad analogies, to avoid poor parables. Prayer, for instance, is not a machine. nor is it magic, nor even advice offered to God. When we pray, our act, like all our acts, must not be separated from the ongoing, continuous act of God Himself. It is through Him that all finite causes, including our prayers, operate. It would be a grave mistake to think of those who receive what they pray for as akin to court favorites, people who have some undue influence with the divine throne. The refused prayer of Christ in Gethsemane is a sufficient answer to that, and I cannot ignore a hard truth I once heard from an experienced Christian. I have seen many striking answers to prayer, some that I thought were even miraculous, but they most often come at the beginning, either before or just after conversion. As the Christian life proceeds, these miracles become rarer. The refusals grow more frequent, more unmistakable, more emphatic. Does God then forsake those who serve Him most faithfully? Well, we must recall that the one who served God best of all, Jesus Christ, cried out from the cross in His greatest agony, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:46. When God becomes man, that man, above all others, is least comforted by God at his moment of greatest need. There is a mystery here, one that, even if I had the power, I might not have the courage to fully explore. Meanwhile, for little people like you and me, when our prayers are sometimes granted beyond hope or expectation, we ought not to hastily conclude that this is to our personal advantage. If we were stronger, we might be treated with less tenderness. If we were braver, we might be sent to defend far more desperate posts with far less help in the great spiritual battle. As C.S. Lewis once wrote, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is His megaphone to rouse a deaf world." Sometimes, in His wisdom, He allows us the comfort of an answered prayer, but at other times, He calls us to endure the silence, trusting in His greater plan.